Cully Stimson, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats podcast. We'd love for you to share some opening comments about America's principle of civic duty, and then we'll go to questions.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Kathy and Janine. It's great to be with Tova and Jorn and Jewel and Jacob. Nice to meet you. It's always a privilege and pleasure to be with you and your team and all the loyal followers of Constituting America. So I've been asked to talk about civic virtue, and I have not read your materials that Kathy referenced at the top, but I have some familiarity with the Constitution. So let me sort of start with some opening thoughts, and I'm going to end with the 12 civic virtues I think make for a good citizen. John Adams said, "Liberty can no more exist without virtue than the body can live and move without a soul." And I think he's right. Before we can talk about the 12 civic virtues or duties critical to being a responsible citizen of the country, we need to start with civic education in order to keep our republic, to paraphrase Benjamin Franklin. And obviously, because you're attending this and other programs put on by Constituting America, and you've been following your social studies teachers or your homeschoolers, or you've done your own reading, I know you care about what it means to be a citizen. But you really need to understand the benefits and privilege and duties of a citizen in a free society to acquire the habits of character to live responsibly in a free society. And that, of course, starts with an understanding of how the government works, how it's structured, the brilliance of the separation of powers, and why our founders drafted the Constitution the way they did during that hot summer of 1787 in Philadelphia. It helps to understand why the Articles of Confederation failed and why the Constitution did not include a Bill of Rights until 1791, and what those original 12 amendments to the Constitution were and why we only ended up with 10 at first. It also helps immensely to understand or have a basic understanding of the vertical separation of powers between the federal government and as between the states. And I know some of you are inclined to philosophy, and it helps you a lot if you've read Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theologica, which lays out the distinctions between duties to God and duties to human authorities, or have read the Greek play Antigone, or read anything by Thomas More, or read about the role of natural law and the founders' deep readings on the same. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all that, but in other words, you have to have a basic understanding of the human condition over time and why our country came into being and the boldness of the Constitution before you can grasp the need for civic virtues. As James Madison said in Federalist number 51, quote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary," unquote. But of course, we're not angels. Part of the reason for the Constitution's enduring strength is that it is the complement of the Declaration of Independence, which provides the philosophical basis for our government and defines the conditions for a free people whose rights and liberties are derived from their creator. So we know the beginning part of the Declaration, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed," unquote. But how do we give our consent to the government? How do we move forward as a diverse country on topics ranging from the mundane to the most serious of all, like, for example, taking the nation to war? You can't have a successful democracy without virtuous people. And virtuous peoples in this country, and they do exist, including everyone on this call, exhibit all or most of the following 12 civic virtues, inimical to a responsible society. 1, self-governance, to be self-controlled, avoiding extremes. 2, prudence, practical wisdom that applies reason and fact to discern right courses of action. 3, courage, to take constructive action in the face or fear of danger and to stand firm as a person of character. Do what's right, even if you don't want to do it. 4, honor, Demonstrate good character and integrity in thinking and your actions. 5, humility. 6, integrity. Always tell the truth and keep one's promises. 7, justice. Obey the law, the rule of law, and apply it evenly and respect the rights and dignity of everyone. 8, moderation. Avoid excesses. 9, perseverance. To forge onwards no matter how hard. 10, respect. Honor your body and mind as gifts from God and extend that respect to everyone else. 11, responsibility. Use good judgment and demonstrate trustworthiness by making decisions in the best long-term interest of others. And finally, 12, vigilance. Be alert and attentive to the needs of others. And finally, what are some of the outward manifestations of civic virtue here in America? And I'm going to leave the rest of my time for Q&A because Kathy has given me direct orders and I follow them as a Navy guy. 1, voting. That's a pretty simple example. Serving in the military. Obeying the law. Volunteering for charities or people in need. Helping your fellow man. The list can go on, and I'm sure many of you who are listening online can add to this. But I'll end with a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes. And he said, quote, "A man must take part in the actions and passions of his time at the peril of being judged not to have lived," unquote. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to give these opening remarks, and I'm much more looking forward to your discussion and Q&A.
Well, thank you, Cully. And your whole life is such a great example of civic duty and living those principles. And we're just so honored to have you with us here today as our guest. And I really loved your list of 12 civic virtues. That was great. So I know we've got a lot of questions lined up. And Janine, we'd like to start with you.
Great. First of all, can you hear this fan? Is the fan distracting? I have this massive fan on because my air conditioning doesn't work. Can
Nope,
you hear it?
not at all.
Okay, we're good. Okay. You just amaze me, Colonel Stimson, and I love those 12 virtues. Will you send those to us so that we have those?
Sure.
Yeah, that was really terrific. And I echo saying that your contribution to our country is admirable, and your continued contribution to the country and your heart for service. You're exemplary. I think you represent all 12 of those virtues, in my opinion.
Well, I'm not anywhere close to being perfect. In fact, I've made more mistakes than successes I've had, but you're nice to say.
Well, haven't we all? I mean,
Yep.
Isn't that what our founders were saying? That men are not angels. We're human. We're not God, and we're all going to make mistakes. And I've learned it's through the darkest times I learn the most, and it's through my mistakes that my character is chiseled. So, which leads me, I just want to focus on one of your virtues, humility. I think I read this fabulous article in Psychology Today about certainty and humility. And it was talking about the fact that in our nation today, there's this adamancy about, we are certain, this is our view, and we know this is our view, and we're right, and we are certain. And what we've lost is a sense of humility in our civic discourse, where we don't come into the conversation saying, I'm certain and I'm right, where we say, let me be humble and let me listen. And I loved this article. I thought that's really, really indicative of what's happening now. I think social media has done this. People get stirred up with the 24-hour news cycle. And it doesn't mean that we don't have passions and we're not committed to our core beliefs that are genuine and virtuous, but it just means in a society where everyone comes to the table feeling certain, we hit a deadlock. And I think if our founding fathers hadn't been able to have a sense of humility and a sense of collaboration, we wouldn't be standing here today. And talk to us about that virtue of humility.
Yeah, so I mean, you and I are of a certain age. Of course, I'm much older than you, Kathy, or Janine, but we're of a certain age before the internet was created, before the iPhone. Most of the folks on the top of the bar here, Tova and Jordan and Jewel, probably don't remember a time in their life when they didn't have instant access to Google. Jacob, I would include as well. And of course, we had to work harder. We had to go to the library. We had to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica or wherever resources our parents had or our teachers had. And I think there's a sort of an instant gratification syndrome that has pervaded our society, that you type in a question, you get an answer. It's not necessarily true. And you think you're armed with facts, and then you hold out those facts as true or not, it's irrelevant. And opinion is as important as fact. And so I'll give you a perfect example. When I was a law professor, and by the way, I did retire from the Navy a year and a half ago, Kathy, so I'm just an old retired captain now. So I'm no longer serving, but thank you for extending my service, and I'm sure my wife would enjoy the pay. I was teaching evidence at law school, and I called, you call on students, and Tova, you guys, whenever you head off to law school, maybe someday you'll see. And I asked Billy Bob to stand up and give a factual presentation of something. And he stood up and he said, well, I feel, and wait. This is law school. I don't care how you feel. And he starts talking more. I feel this. Wait. What are the facts in Jones versus Smith? He goes on for a little while. And then I feel, I'm like, third time, so have a seat. Psychology degree is in the other building. This is a law degree. I want to know the facts. And so I think that what's happened is, and I don't know why, I have opinions, is that we've moved from a place not too long ago where it took a long time to get to the bottom of something, and you then tested out your findings in a less fast-paced, instant gratification milieu, to a point where you can type in any question, get an instant answer, and arm yourself with that information. I didn't say facts, and then hold it out as your opinion. And then we've also given permission for people to think that nobody can challenge opinions. And I think if we step back to, the core of your question, what role does humility play? I'm sure you feel the same way I do. The older I get, the more certain I am that I don't know a lot. And that's because the longer you live, the more you realize there's more out there to learn. And I think that there's a certain bravado of teenagers and young 20-somethings, and I got a few in my house right now. I've got 4 of them, to want to know everything. But I think the longer you study and the deeper you think and the more you experience life, the more you realize, actually, I don't know that much. And hopefully you develop a sense of humility, especially after you make the right mistakes. And we all make mistakes. And so one of the reasons I included humility is because I did a lot of reading when Kathy asked me to join you today. And I think one of the hallmarks of the ability to get things done in this country is to have a sense of humility, because that invites people to approach you. I mean, who wants to come up to the cocky know-it-all and think they're going to get somewhere? None of us, right? Whereas the humble person, the old saying, silent waters run deep. The humble person is the approachable person, and that's a reasonable person, usually. That's sort of the way I think about it.
Wonderful conversation, and I'm so glad you put humility on there. And I want to pass to everyone else, but my last question is about this, along the same principle here. Thank goodness we still have law and court systems and the Bill of Rights, that when people are in situations, they can have someone represent them, and where that conversation can be had. That's not happening on the 24-hour news cycle or in podcasts or unchecked media. And I think that I'm always astonished about how 3 or 4 words are lifted from an article or and then following 4 words, qualify that and explain it and further out the person's meaning and purpose of what they're trying to say. And if you pull out those 4 words, you can misconstrue the entire statement. And then people, boom, they're off to the races. You know, this is what we're gonna put all of our eggs in this basket on those 4 words, where no one's even taking the time to really, what would be the word? You know,
Look at the full context.
Assess
Right.
the true. In other words, there doesn't seem to be any latitude anymore for a philosophical conversation to put something forth, or even to give the person a benefit of doubt, and let's say, let's look at the whole sentence. And then the news media takes it and they harp on those 4 words instead of the 8 words or the 10 words, which qualified what they were trying to say. And it's destroying our country, I think.
I don't think it's helpful. In the law, there's a rule called the rule of completeness. And so when I was a judge, and a prosecutor or defense attorney would object to another side's statement, and I would hear the explanation, I would say, well, I'm going to overrule your objection, counsel. Just get more of the context out from the witness and have the witness explain what he's saying. And of course, the society is not a court of law, and so the media, of course, is a business, and the business, as you well know, lives on controversy. That's how they get ratings. And so, you know, I think if we had cable news back in 1787, it would be even more vituperative than it is today, because of course, back then you had a president from one party and a vice president from another party who's trying to undermine the president. You had people caning each other on the House of Representatives, which would have been good for C-SPAN ratings. So I'm not sure much has changed, except today, vis-a-vis my first answer to your first question about humility, is that there's this meta amplification because of social media and the instant delivery of information. Notice I didn't say facts or news across the spectrum. And typically, and I've said this to Tova and Jorn and Jewel before, that, you know, I encourage you to read outside your comfort zone. If your favorite news site is ABC, then read XYZ. If you normally go to XYZ, then go to ABC. Because, you know, if you really want to get to the bottom of something, read broadly. You know, one of the 12 civic virtues, one of the civic virtues that I considered putting on the list, but I didn't, is kindness. The ability to forgive people. And I debated it. Maybe it's cabined inside humility or respect, and that's why I didn't put kindness out there front. But, you know, we've all said things we regret. When we, you know, growing up, our parents or caregivers teach us to admit our mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And, you know, if our elected politicians from either side of the aisle adopted 90% of these civic virtues and practiced them every day, ratings would be down 90% on the cable news channels, because there wouldn't be a lot of news and a lot of stuff would get done. But that's just not part of the human condition. And that's why I listed civic education as a predicate to understanding civic virtue, because that's why the separation of powers and the structure of the government protects each of us as individuals from the base motivations of the human condition. Remember, Shakespeare said, you know, greed is that green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds upon, right? And there's a lot of greed that goes on. Can you
say that Shakespeare quote again, please?
Greed is that green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds upon.
Ah, yep. Yeah. Well, and you pull 3 words out and they'll build a whole business around that and misconstrue everything and scare the entire nation. And we can go on and on. Okay. Right. Well, wonderful discussion. I'm going to pass it to Tova. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janine. And thank you, Cully, for being on. And that was a really great framework to understand, really breaking down something as big as, you know, civic duty. So what I wanted to ask about is, I think that there's sort of a misconception that in order to give back to your country or to, you know, follow civic duty, you essentially only do that if you go into politics or you serve in government or serve in the military or something that's very directly affecting the country. So could you talk a bit about if you don't go into a career like that, if you go into something like business or science, how can you show your civic duty? And I know that's something we think a lot about at Constituting America, which is why we have so many categories, for instance, for our We the Future contest. But I was curious how you think about that.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And in fact, my 12 were directed at the 318 million people who don't serve in the government, because that's why I listed sort of the outward manifestations of this civic duty, the reification of your civic duty. Obviously, you slap on the uniform, you serve as a firefighter, a politician, a city councilman, a school librarian, a teacher. You're participating in civil society, you're serving in the government. But voting, obeying the law, paying your taxes, creating a business, and then running that business ethically and hiring people to provide for them and their lifestyle. I mean, you create Tova Inc. It gets 5 employees. That may be 30 people, mouths you're feeding. Tova Inc. becomes Tova Corp. And it's 1,000 people. You're now feeding 10,000 people and providing for the livelihood, the college educations. You're paying the tax base, property tax, home values, etc. And so volunteering. We all have our favorite charities. Mine is the U.S. Soccer Foundation. We use to help underserved and underprivileged kids all around the country in 29 cities, 130,000 kids. But we all have our favorite charities, right? Whether it's Boys and Girls Club, whether it's PETA, whether it's, I don't care what it is, but support your local 501c3 charities, your church. Helping your fellow man. Go read in an old folks' home. They're starving for public interaction. Habitat for Humanity, any number of ways. George H.W. Bush talked about 1,000 points of light, as Kathy will remember from the day. Well, there's a lot more civic organizations out there where you can participate in a meaningful way and fulfill your civic responsibilities. I don't think, Tova, and I hope it didn't come across this way, I don't think that you owe the country anything except to be an educated citizen and live under the blanket of privilege that we all live under here. I mean, and I remember when Barack Obama was the president, and there was this whole silly debate about whether we're an exceptional country or not. I mean, that's the dumbest debate I've ever heard. I mean, don't you think the English think they're an exceptional country? And don't you think the French think they're exceptional? Don't you think the people from Burkina Faso think they're exceptional, or Chad, or, I mean, of course they do. And so, people in Israel think they're an exceptional country. I mean, there's a lot of countries in the world and people think their country is exceptional, and they all are exceptional. Ours is exceptional because ours was the first country created based on a creed, that all men were created equal. And we embodied those principles in the Declaration, but also the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But every country is unique. But I think, I'm glad you asked that question, because this is not pointed towards the 2.8 or 6 million people who work in state and federal government.
Well, that's great. I like the very specific pieces of advice you have, and that's really helpful. And then I was curious, what you were talking about earlier in your overview really stuck with me, kind of when you referenced like Antigone and different philosophies of why we should, when we should and shouldn't follow laws. So I was asking if you could follow up on that, and how do we know as a citizen of a country which laws we should follow, even if we strongly disagree with them, versus if there's ever a law, not necessarily in America, but if we're ever in a society where there's a law that might be unjust, how do we know whether we should follow it against our sort of internal struggles with that law, or whether when it might be time to, rebel or defy that law, such as the founders did when they were, endeavoring to create their own society?
Yeah. So you should probably add a philosophy major to your economics and poli-sci major, because it's a very deep question and it's about a 6-hour answer, but I'll try to be short. I mean, acts of civil disobedience, which is what you're talking about, are common. We do that all the time. You do it and you don't even realize it sometimes. Like, you'll jaywalk. I guarantee you have jaywalked. And that's basically, I'm not sitting here waiting for this green hand on that sign. Okay. You have speeded in your car, right? Of course. That's breaking the law. Now, it's not the end of the world. Now, if you're going 120, now you're endangering other people. But it's a 55 speed zone, you go 60, you're breaking the law. And we all do it. I do it. Okay. Now, if you know, for the most part, I think, you know, because we have the separation of powers at the federal and state level, and because the states and the states alone have police power, the states are the ones that pass laws of a criminal nature in 90% of cases that are prosecuted at the state level because they're state law violations. So if there's a law on the books, murder, rape, robbery, etc., and you don't like it, too bad, follow it. That's just the way it is. Now, if it's you can't vote if you're black, you can't vote if you're a woman, obviously we've resolved those issues. It took way too long to resolve those issues, but we've eventually resolved those issues through not only acts of civil disobedience, but also a civil war in terms of slavery. But, you know, there are a lot of laws on the books, probably too many, many of which don't have a mens rea requirement, which means a requirement for you to even know about the existence of the law, which Congress needs to fix at the federal level and the states need to fix at the state level. But for the most part, for us to have an ordered and civil society, you got to follow the law. But I mean, you tee up a more interesting philosophical question, and that is, if it's so egregious and wrong, what do you do? And I think, you know, for example, at the federal level, if you're a federal government employee and you think something's going wrong or illegal in your agency, there's a Whistleblower Protection Act, which Congress has passed, which gives individual employees of the federal government the chance to work through proper channels and eventually go up to Congress to say, hey, they're breaking the law here, they're doing this wrong, to air that. There you have the same procedures at the state level. But what I would say as a general matter, not a philosophical matter, is you should follow the law unless it's so egregious that you need to engage in lawful civil disobedience.
Well, thank you for giving that great concise answer to my 6-hour question. And my final question was, you talk as one of your values of civic duty, civic education and being aware. And obviously at Constituting America, we think a lot about what a civic education should look like. So I was curious, in your opinion, we talk about a civic education, but what does that actually mean to you? What should the goal of a civic education be? And where do you feel like current civic education could maybe be improved to fulfill what ideal you might have in mind?
Well, if I hit the lottery and got that $1.5 billion a few weeks ago, I would have given a lot to Constituting America, and I would have twiggled my nose like Elizabeth Montgomery and Bewitched and required Constituting America in every 8th grade and 9th grade public and private school across the country. If we could do that, we would be so much further along as a society. I have some kids, as you know, in private school, some kids in public school. This is not a knock on public school, because some private schools are pretty bad at this too. But I think that there's a general lack of understanding of the stuff you all take for granted here at Constituting America, because you guys do such a great job sort of going through the basics, right? Talking about, the various bills of rights in the Bill of Rights, the separation of powers. You do deep dives here. I mean, anyone who wants to get up to speed on what their government is, why their government's structured the way it is, what the constituent parts are, why the Articles of Confederation failed, why the separation of powers is different in our country and a bulwark against the excesses of mankind and their demons for power, should just go on your website and do a deep dive and spend 20 minutes to an hour every week getting up to speed. And so when I hit that lottery, Tova, I'll give some to Tova Inc., of course, your seed money. Of course, I expect a 20% return on investment. And then a lot more will go to Constitution of America, because all kidding aside, we have lost the appetite to talk about facts and to talk about things that are indisputable. The Constitution was passed in 1787. The Articles of Confederation failed for various reasons, all of which you all know on this call because you study it. You understand why the various bills of rights, or why the original Bill of Rights had 10 bills of rights and what they did and didn't do. You understand that they all exist to preserve personal liberty. And so I think a lot of the silly debates and discussions we have today, we wouldn't have if people had a basic understanding of their government and the structure of their government, because then we could have a deeper discussion about the right policies that may help the common good and the general welfare and support the general welfare clause, and whether the Commerce Clause has been stretched beyond recognition or whether it hasn't, and things like that. So, let me give you a perfect example. Every June, the most controversial, high visibility Supreme Court cases are issued by the court. Most people don't realize that 70 to 90% of the cases issued by the Supreme Court are unanimous. And that's because they're, about antitrust and other stuff that people don't really have a lot of interest in, except the ruling class or the niche lawyer class or the affected entities. They care about the ones that, the news talks about. And hardly anyone will read the actual opinions. And when they do read the opinions, they'll just get to the end, the result. But they won't have an understanding, even as a layperson's level, of how the court got there in their majority opinion. Whether you agree or disagree with the opinion, it's sort of understanding the flow of that, because, all three co-equal branches of the government interpret the Constitution. It's not just the Supreme Court. And so I think, I'm glad you and Jorn and Jewel and Jacob are there, because, you're the future of this country. You're the ones, because, they're not going to listen to somebody my age. You are the guys who are going to have to arm yourself to have intelligent conversations, and all the people on this line, so that you can say, well, I appreciate your opinion on that, but actually the Constitution says this. Let's start here, because it starts with you guys.
Well, thank you so much for that. This has been a really inspiring chat, and now I'll pass on to Jewel and Jordan. Thank you so much.
How are you doing today? It is
Great, guys.
You're doing a fantastic again, as always. It's always a joy having you.
Great to see you too.
Your opinion, what 3 of your 12 in order is America missing most? So what would you say is most needed for Americans to really do their civil duty?
Well, that's a good question, and you're putting it to me. Good on you. Respect, because without respect, you got nothing. Integrity. And honor. I think if you have those things, you can subsume some of the other ones inside it, and we'll be a long way towards having a more perfect union.
Yeah, I was listening and looking at your list, and I was thinking, I wouldn't want to be asked that question, because, it seems once you pick one that is necessary, the next one looks just as important. So that was definitely, thank you. I just wanted to use that, and I just want to shoot back and forth. So
you thought I was going to say justice because I'm burdened with a law degree. And you could say, well, you're wrong because you missed it, Cully, because if you don't have the rule of law, you got nothing. And that's a good point, right? I mean, I'm sure you thought that's where I was going to go, and I was torn by that. But I think if you include, respect and extend the respect to everyone else, that includes law. So I'm sort of being creative lawyer in here, but I mean, you got to have the enforcement of the rule of law.
Well, yeah, with respect and honor, I think, yeah. you encompass it.
So our civic duty comes down to being kind of promoted to us as every 4 years you go vote. There's a lot of campaigns that kind of make you feel like that. We'll see billboards up, and it will be even in our high schools, but it will rarely be there when it's time for the school board meeting or it's time for other things. On the flip side of that question, though, it's interesting to me when you look at the way our founders understood voting. That's not what they understood to be our main civic duty. So that would be kind of shown in just that the political realm for our founders and the way that we governed ourselves was one piece of our entire life, our culture, our society. And there's many quotes from our founders talking about the place of churches and the place of that our society doesn't work without these virtues, like you just said, and where those virtues come from. So part of my question is that I wonder if our understanding of voting as being our civic duty has kind of twisted our idea of our civic duty, and that voting being a right and voting being a privilege, not having any stipulation to vote. I mean, I think everybody on the podcast is probably really happy about some of the amendments that allowed everybody to vote. So not necessarily that, but I think some people would probably be surprised that only landowners could vote originally. But while there's been good developments, has it confused our responsibilities and made something seen as a right, which is in fact our founders saw as a privilege?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think this ties back to Tova's first question, which was the misconception between, the civic duties and virtues of people who just work for the government versus all of society. Because voting, yeah, that's one example of a civic duty. It's a privilege and a right. It's been changed over time, as you noted. Who can vote? The age has changed over time. Whether you had to own property or not changed over time. But right now, as we speak, there are tens of billions of decisions being made and played out across America by every single person who's here legally and illegally. And they're doing that because they have to get from A to B. They're deciding whether to go across state line. They're deciding whether to use a phone, which then allows them to cross interstate lines. They're exercising, they're helping senior citizens, they're helping the poor. They're in soup kitchens right over here in the basement of Gonzaga School, where they're helping feed the homeless. Sisters of Charity, which is just down the way here in Southeast DC. People are volunteering to cut up vegetables, sweep the floors. These are, in one way, it seems because politics is so acidic these days, and we're being manipulated in the non-pejorative sense, manipulated by this campaign or that campaign or this cable news network or that cable news network. You got to vote for them. Look, isn't the election for president a year and a half away? And we're having debates now. By the time you get to the summer before the November election for president, we've heard, I don't know how many ads. The number of people who are capable of being moved one way or the other is infinitesimal, yet we still get pelted by all these ads. So it almost seems like the civic right, the right of people to vote is the most important, because we're just getting pummeled over the head by those ads. When in fact, we enjoy countless other rights and privileges of living in this country under our constitutional republic that we should exercise all the time. And we do exercise all the time. Volunteering to coach your kid, volunteering to be a Boy Scout or Girl Scout leader, volunteering to help, I don't care, be a reader at your church. I'm a reader at my church. I mean, the Bible doesn't read itself out loud, so they make people go up to the lectern and read it out loud. And so there's a lot of ways that continue across this country that allow you to exercise those civic virtues. I'll tell you an interesting little quick story. So I'm not in the education policy department here at Heritage, but my colleagues are. And they were meeting with some senior government officials from a country in northwestern Europe. And they were talking about the state of education and explaining how our education system works in the country, and mainly that it's at the state level, and the state school districts are funded through property taxes, and just explaining this sort of the basics. And all of a sudden they got to school choice. And these people from this country said, what do you mean school choice? And they said, well, our belief is that the parents are the original educators of the children, and that here you can go to a parochial school, you can go to private school, you can go to public school, you can homeschool. And their heads were spinning. They're like, what? Your country lets you do that? And their opinion was their country owns their kids, and their country decides from the time the kid's 3 or 4 years old till the time gets out of college, where that kid goes to school, how much money spent on that school, what curriculum that kid has, etc. And it was so odd for them to get their head around this idea that the parents are the original and first educators of their kids. That's not saying their country's wrong. It's just saying that we enjoy so many other rights and privileges in our country they don't even think about because we grew up here. We're here. So I think that the right to vote is amplified because of politics. And of course, if you live in one of the major metropolitan cities, you're going to hear about these political advertisements all the time. But there's millions of others that we get to play out and exercise every day.
Yeah, and I think that of course that was all very interesting answer, and there's a lot of important information for people to consider, because I do think we do a disservice with the get out to vote campaign kind of takes over, and there's a bit of a assumption of virtue that you can kind of feel good about, but then you don't do all of the other things that you just said. And we spend seeming like more money on voting stickers than we do on soup kitchens around that time of year. And I don't know where we're seeing the net benefit of that in our society necessarily. And as we are in extremely polarized times and everybody has really strong feelings about things, we don't do a lot of things. So I don't think anyone's ever asked me. We do a lot of volunteer work and things like that, but I don't think when I've been in an argument with someone, or when somebody's really wanted me to maybe sign up on my college campus to vote, they've never asked to come volunteer for something. And then maybe our listeners here can kind of really consider that and do something with do that instead of maybe the next political thing they want to do.
I'm not sure you're giving yourself enough credit. I think you guys are pretty young and hip, and you're probably inspiring more people than you know about, because you're educated, you know what's going on. And I think it's less important to me, what political party or parties you're supporting or not supporting. It's more important that you're just participating, that you're a man in the arena, and that you're out there as an example for other people who are your age or younger, who will be inspired by your civic participation.
Well, that's our goal on Cause City America.
I know it is.
You
did a great job at it.
Yeah, we've benefited from the organization, and we try to do what we can. The one other thing is locally, this may not be in your expertise, so we're getting late too, so you can kind of pass on the question if it doesn't fit. But there's a lot of our civic duty is and should be local, but it's really hard to get involved with local politics. It can be really nasty, and then it can also seem like, but we also don't understand even what to do or how to change anything locally, or what that means, or if there's anyone cares if you try. So I don't know if there's anything you can say about that, because I'm not sure how much that's something that you
alluded to one potential answer early, and that is if you're on a college campus, there's, you got two flavors, Democrat or Republican, and you can go to the Democrats or Republican organizing group and try to get involved with them. Some colleges have really good college Republicans or college Democrat groups. Others are pretty moribund and they're not terribly good. But that doesn't mean you can't just get in there and goose them and get them going. And you can find out, like you said, who's running for school board, who's running for city council, who's running for, there's a lot of local offices that people sort of tend to look over. Like the book I wrote, this road prosecutor book, there's 2,300 elected DAs around the country. These are low visibility, low dollar races. Hardly anyone volunteers for that, yet your public safety privilege depends on who your DA is, right? And so, there's a lot of ways to get involved, but I think you got to start with, flavor A or flavor B, the Democrat or Republican, and we're a two-party system, and then you go from there. But, to Janine's point about humility, one of the things I've learned how to do is say, I don't know. I don't have the answer. And I think if more people just got in the habit of saying, I don't know, starting with, I don't know, and then, but I can look into it, or, but my gut tells me, or you might want to talk to so-and-so, or you may want to look into this, but I've never really studied it. Instead of Google, 10 seconds later, there's your answer, and I'm going to stick by it forever. And then I'm going to dig my teeth in. It's like, oh, come on. You don't know the first thing about the Project of Reformation.
If the flavors of red and blue, what are the flavors? Strawberry, blueberry?
I don't know.
I think we could do strawberry and blue raspberry. Those could be the flavors of a Republican, Democrat.
Whatever makes you happy.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Let's get to some audience questions here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for those great answers. And Cully, thank you. It's just been such a pleasure having you today. Now, we have got a lot of audience demand for your list of 12 civic virtues. And Kathy Weber, and let's see, Lynn Gerber and Lori Mill, and gosh, who else is asking? Micheline Bush, all are asking for that. So if you will email that to me, we will email it out to everybody listening today, because it was such a great list, and we'll get that out to everybody. So thank you for that. And we also want to take a moment and recognize all of our teachers and students who are watching with us today. We have Ann McCoy with students from the Cushman School. We have Brandy Staten with 26 students from La Signe CYGNE Elementary. We have Sherry Stiegel with several homeschool students, and we have Nikki Englert with several homeschool students. And I saw Cami Waynehouse on, and I know Cami has homeschool students as well. So we want to thank all of our teachers and students. We also want to thank KKVV, radio station in Las Vegas, that replays our constitutional chats Monday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific on 1060 a.m. So thank you to all of our listeners there in Las Vegas on KKVV. Now, Cully, one of the questions that came up is from Nancy and Conroe, and Nancy had asked about jury duty, the civic virtue of jury duty. And Nancy said it seems that these days so many people spend most of their time trying to get out of jury duty. Can you explain why, especially to our young people listening, why it's an important civic duty to serve on a jury?
I love that question from Nancy. It's probably one of the most obvious and best ways to help ensure that the rule of law is enforced properly. It's also unique privilege because you have to be over a certain age, usually 18 or older. And unlike the Star Chambers from Great Britain back in the day, or other countries that where only the judge decides, we believe, and those of you who remember the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution, there was a whole segment on the Sixth Amendment that Constitution America has done. Remember that it's a unique, it is an antidote and reaction against the Star Chambers and unilateral decision by the king or the king's henchmen in England. And it gives you, a citizen, the right and privilege to judge your peer based on a list of instructions, i.e. called the law, that the judge will charge you with, and then weigh the facts presented by the government, if it's a criminal trial, beyond a reasonable doubt, if it's a civil trial, by clear and convincing evidence, and decide whether to assign blame in a criminal trial, that means find them guilty or not. I would encourage all of you to watch 12 Angry Men. It's a brilliant movie. Of course, it started as a play. And you'll see, I mean, if we didn't believe in a jury trial and we didn't want juries to deliberate, you would just give them all a clicker. And at the end of the closing argument, everyone would click a button. That would be it. And then unless there's unanimous, then it would be not guilty. But there's a lot of, I mean, all 12 of these virtues that I laid out come into play when you're on a jury. Because you have to be respectful, you have to have perseverance, you have to have moderation, you look for justice, integrity, humility, honor, courage, prudence, self-governance, responsibility, vigilance. Watch 12 Angry Men. And so I think it's very unfortunate that people try to get out of jury duty, because it is one of the best educations you're going to have, and you get to be the rubber that meets the road. This is active civic participation in the law architecture of our country. And so now when you're young, you don't have a job, you think $40 a day is great, because of course you get paid as a juror. When you have a career and a job and kids and deadlines, you know, I think a lot of people think, oh my gosh, they got to go down there and don't even know if I'm going to get picked for a jury. I got to miss a day of work. And if I get picked for a jury, then I'm out for 2 weeks. How the heck am I going to be able to pull that off? That's the mentality versus what a privilege. Because when you got 90 emails a day, kid soccer practices to get your kids to, a dog who's sick, a spouse who's mad at you because you haven't done the grocery shopping or whatever it is you're supposed to be doing, and all the other stuff, you forget about the privilege of serving on a jury. And most jury trials are short. And for longer jury trials, they usually take Friday. I mean, as a judge, so I know about jury trials. Usually they go dark on Friday, so there's no trials on Friday, and they might do a half day on Thursday. And with remote work, you know, by the way, your employer, most employers, especially public employers, are required to let you participate in jury trials, and that's not counted against your leave. Whereas private employers have somewhat different rules, and some of them are more generous. So I would encourage you, when you get that summons, don't blow it off, number one. Number two, if you blow it off, they can arrest you. So don't treat it like a parking ticket. It is a summons from a judge saying show up or else. Now, the chance of them sending the bailiff down to your house is small, but you just don't want to blow it off.
Well, thank you. You've inspired me for sure. I'm ready to answer that next jury summons enthusiastically. And just in the 2 minutes that we have left, Cindy is asking if you think that the spirit of civic duty has diminished over the past, few decades, and what do you think that we can do to inspire citizens to want to become more civically active and embrace their civic duty?
Well, I do think we've become less civic minded, less patriotic. I think just the fact that the word patriotism or patriotic is not embraced by people is sad. We're an imperfect country, but we're still a great country. And I think that, if you can afford it, go to France, go to the American Cemetery in Normandy and stand there for an hour. And if you're not patriotic after that, then you're dead. Because people have given their lives across our short country's history so that you can enjoy the blessings of liberty. And so I think you need to recommit yourself to understanding the ultimate price that a lot of people have given, and get back to some of the basics.
Well, thank you. And we are right at the top of the hour. And so we want to thank you so much for being with us today. And we want to invite everybody to come back and join us next week. We're going to launch a new series on justice. So the whole question and answer about the jury duty is such a great lead into that. Next week, we're going to be talking about the conscience of America, the Declaration of Independence. And then we'll, the next week will be Lady Justice, Why the Blindfold, and then Justice in Our Checks and Balances, and then Justice Inherent in Our Inalienable Rights. So we're really looking forward to that series. And Cully, thank you so much for helping us close out our series on first principles of the American founding.
It's always an honor and pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you. And thank you to our audience. We appreciate you for all your great questions, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much.